So today we've got Scott Ian. Scott is the lead guitarist for heavy metal band Anthrax, and he will be in Australia in late September and early October doing his spoken word tour across the country. Scott, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us today, this morning over here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So look, right before we started recording, I asked you, you would do a lot of media interviews like this. What are the worst type of questions I can avoid asking you today?
Usually, I would say generally anything that that is really obvious that you just kind of went on Wikipedia and made a list of the first 10 things you saw on Wikipedia.
Yeah,
it's always pretty obvious to someone being interviewed. And as many interviews as I do when, someone just did maybe 2 minutes of research on the internet and then they start asking me questions. And I tend to answer those with, well, I think you could probably look the answer to that one up. So how about something that I can actually give you the answer to?
And do you find, are you forced to try to be a little bit jovial? Because I assume you must get sort of placed with a lot of junior reporters who do that sort of activity. How do you maintain any sort of enthusiasm for that?
I don't. I actually believe in this. Some people will think this is coming off as me being an asshole, but I think after doing interviews, for records since 1984, I've earned the right to not have to answer stupid questions.
Fair enough. Okay.
And so no, I really don't suffer the foolishness most of the time. What I'll end up doing, it's not all the time. I have to say, out of 100 interviews I'll do, let's say in a week's time, when I'm doing promotion for something, maybe a half a dozen of them will really annoy me. So, I mean, that's a pretty good, percentage of good interviews. But I'll always remember the really bad ones, because those are the ones, that generally is like, oh my God, really? Are you really going to ask me about the Anthrax stuff after 9/11 now? It's 2018. So it's really interesting now to answer that question. It's what I end up doing a lot, especially when I'm doing promo for a new album, and I'll go to Europe. I'll be sitting at the record company office for 4 or 5 days in a row, and I'm not joking, doing 30 to 40 interviews a day, phoners, all over Europe, just sitting there talking to 30 to 40 people a day. And I start making, not even because of bad questions, I just get so sick of hearing my own voice answer things the same way over and over again. I literally just start making things up, because then at least it keeps me interested.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, look, what are we? We're in July, so a couple months away from having to come down and do your spoken word tour. I've not seen you do this before. I've spent a number of years listening to, Rollins and Jello Biafra do this work in the space. What sort of interested you to, get into that or fill up your time with doing that outside of your musician work with the band?
I never really was looking to do it. It's one of the few times in life when something actually did fall in my lap. I tend to find that doesn't happen in life. If you want something, you have to make it happen. Nobody's handing you anything. And this literally got handed to me.
Right.
Maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years. Maybe I should just stay home and wait for the phone to ring. That's literally what happened. I was off tour at some point from Anthrax about 5 years. I know when it was. It was back in 2012, I believe, because we were about to start a Motorhead tour in Europe towards the end of 2012. So it was before we were coming over for that. And my agent called and said, hey, would you be interested? This promoter in London is doing a series of these dates. It's called something like Rock Stars Say the Stupidest Things. And he'd really like to have you show up and do one of these shows. and I said, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. He goes, well, just you. It would just be you, not the band. You'd show up and do a performance. And I said, well, I don't do that. Like, I'm going to sit there with a guitar and like sing Anthrax songs. I don't understand. Like, that's not, first of all, I'm not the singer.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that. And he said, no, dummy. It's stories. You get on stage and talk and just tell stories. Oh, okay. And I said, you know what? I looked at my calendar and I said, well, we've got about 3-4 months until we're coming over. I think I can handle that. You know what? I'm curious enough to say yes, just to see if this is something that I could do. Because I'd seen Rollins a bunch of times too over the years. When he first even started doing talking shows, and I loved it. He would hold an audience for 3 hours, and I would never once, be looking at my watch or going to grab a beer or anything. Like, I was literally enthralled for 3 hours watching him speak, and which I thought was pretty amazing. And so I was like, yeah, I'm in. Tell him I'm in, and so I kind of made a plan. I'll start figuring out. I got lots of great stories. I've got lots of tales to tell that I tell in the bar with my friends. I could get on stage and tell some of these great stories. And all right, I'll start thinking about them. I'll start putting them together. Blah 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 blah. And 2 months go by, and I didn't do like 1 ounce of work. And then oh man, I got about a month till we're leaving for England. I got that show. That's right. Shit. I better start thinking about this. All right. Well, all right. I'm busy this week. Next week, I'm definitely going to start thinking about this. Cut to, it's the night before the show in London, and I'm in the hotel room. And this show is taking place the day before Anthrax tour starting.
Right.
So I already got that kind of weighing on me. And now I got to go do something I've never done before in my life. And I'm in my hotel room, and I'm like sweating. What the hell am I going to do? And I'm about to pick up the phone to call the band's agent and say, you got to cancel. You got to cancel tomorrow. I can't do it. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm going to do on stage tomorrow night. And just tell the promoter guy, Scott got sick and we can't risk, having to cancel the first Anthrax show, and just make up some shit. Who's going to care anyway? No, it's not like people have seen it already and they're going to be bummed that they missed it. People aren't even they don't even know what they missed. So who cares, right? I'm about to pick up the phone and make that call. And my wife, Pearl, says to me, don't cancel. You're not canceling. I'm like, what am I going to do? I have no idea what I'm doing tomorrow night. And she says, how many times? Because at least I had made like a list of some stories, and said, how many times have you told these stories with me and some of our friends in a bar around the world? Some of these stories, these stories like the back of your hand. I'm like, yeah, but this is different. This is people who are paying hard-earned British pounds to come sit in a room and expect to be entertained by me. And I'm going to get on, it's different sitting in front of a bunch of my friends who aren't judging me, while I'm telling a tale like this. These are people who this is fucking London. Press is going to show up and say, who the fuck does this guy think he is telling stories? And, I was shitting myself over the idea of having to do it. And, so she's like, look, you're going to be fine. You'll get on stage and you'll just start talking, and it's going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Anyway, that it didn't really help, but I didn't cancel the show. And those 5 to 10 minutes before I had to go on the next night in London at this venue, and there was about 300 people there to see me. I've never been so nervous in my life, and I don't get nervous hardly ever. And I'm not even that I'm afraid of public speaking, because I have no problem getting up in front of people and talking. But I had just never done this before, and really felt like I was really kind of out of my element. And but what am I going to do? It was too late. So you get to that point, you have to do it. It's literally a have to. And I walked out on stage, and I had this opening that I had come up with the night before when I was in the hotel room trying to cancel. I was like, well, I don't even know what to do. What do I do? I walk on stage and like, I don't even know what to say, you know? So I said, I got to have an opening. Somehow I came up with this idea to read a story as if it was my own, but it would be somebody else's story.
Okay.
And somehow or another, I came across Anthony Kiedis's book online. Anthony, I think I actually reached out to a friend of mine. I said, you read a lot of these rock and roll books. I need a really debaucherous story that I want to read, and people will think it's me, and then I'll say, "Ha, you assholes!" You know, it wasn't me, you idiots. And he's like, "Oh, dude, Anthony Kiedis's book, perfect." Because first of all, anyone coming to see you probably won't have read Anthony Kiedis's book.
Yes,
they'll all have read Motley Crue or Marilyn Manson, but they won't have read his book. So I Google it, and what do you know? The whole book, like, I didn't know you could actually steal books online too, like records, because this whole book popped up. So I download like a PDF of it, and the first chapter it goes right in. He starts describing this tale of sitting in the living room of his house in the hills in LA. And this lady comes over in fishnet stockings and shoots him up and blah. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to walk out. I'm going to put this on my phone and just walk out super serious, one little spotlight on me, sit down, be super serious, not even say hello, walk out and start reading this terrible story about getting shot up in my living room. And this whole crowd's going to think it's me, and they're going to be so bummed sitting there going, what the fuck is this show? This is going to be for the next 2 hours, right? But even knowing I was going to do that, I was still shitting my pants. Right. And I walk on stage, and I've got my phone, and I sit down, and people are clapping, and I sit down, and my hand is visibly shaking. Like I'm holding my phone in my hand to read it, and the mic's on a stand, and my hand is shaking, and I'm thinking these people can see my hand shaking, which I guess, all right, I'm telling this horrible tale, so maybe maybe they think he's having a real hard time reliving this tale, so that's why his hand is shaking. Anyway, I tell this horrible story, and then it's fucking, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And there's a lot of people in the room who've known me for a long time, right? Yeah. And I could hear people. I hear someone actually say, like, oh my God, I had no idea he ever was a junkie. I didn't know this. Like, people are freaking out. And I finish the story, and I like put my phone away, and I get up from the stool, and I take the mic off the stand. And now I kind of knew I had the crowd because of how quiet it was. And I still haven't said anything. And then I say to them, pretty, shitty story, huh? And I'm like, yeah. So you all thought that was me, you fucking assholes. And I'm like, this is from Anthony Kiedis's book, Scar Tissue. You idiots, right? And totally breaks the tension. I get a huge laugh. And all my nerves literally drained out of from my head, out my body, out of my feet, and gone. And I spent the next 2.5 hours talking to the crowd, and I had the fucking time of my life.
Excellent.
I walked off stage with like the Joker smile on my face, and I grabbed my agent and I said, we got to do more of this. And within a few months, I had like a whole UK tour booked, and that's how I broke the ice, because it fell in my lap, and I was just curious enough to do it, and it's something I don't get to do often enough. I haven't done shows. I'm actually nervous about Australia, just over the fact that I haven't done a talking show. It's got to be going on close to 2 years. So, right. I know I'll be fine. And the muscle memory, once I get back on stage to do it, is going to kick in. But it's just still that nervousness of, it's not like an Anthrax show where I've done thousands of them. And literally some nights, if I needed to, I could do it with my eyes closed. It's different with this. This is still, even though I've done maybe 40 or 50 shows in total in 5 years or 6 years, but so it's still new to me. It's still it's still a new thing. It's not something I could just get on stage and it's an automatic. It's not like that for me yet.
I wanted to ask you about because we're telling stories here effectively. Earlier you had mentioned Motorhead. I got to see them a couple times when they were still around, but I remember probably around 2012 or 2013, I got to see them at Download while I was living out there at that point in time. And I remember Lemmy was already starting to look quite frail, and I know that you have a massive appreciation for that band. Was the general community aware that he was, sort of on his last legs at that point in time, or what was sort of the feeling when he was starting to get quite ill?
No, he wasn't really that ill yet at that point. He wasn't as healthy as he had been, but no, he was, he was kind of he had been diagnosed with diabetes at some point, if I remember correctly. So, he was battling that. And I remember there was like kind of a constant, I remember at some point when Lemmy switched to vodka, like that was news.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
okay.
in the rock world, that was like a major headline news. So I remember hearing that, like, Lemmy's got diabetes and no more Jack and Cokes to the sugar content. He switched to vodka. I was like, wow, like after 50 years, that's a big deal. But yeah, look, when a guy like that hits the wall after, living the life that he had been living since he was a teenager, you're talking a guy had been hitting it hard for 50 odd years already, by the time the early 2000 teens rolled in. So, eventually you're going to hit the wall. Yeah. I don't care who you are. Everyone hits the wall, and no matter how healthy you are, and no matter how fucked up of a life you've led, how hard you live, and when you've lived as hard as Lemmy did, when you hit the wall, it's going to be worse than the average human. And look, I did spend a lot of time with him over the years. Lucky enough, for me, it was a privilege to have spent almost 30 odd years or something knowing him, and being friendly with him. And I asked him, I asked him one time about smoking. You think you'll ever quit or this or that? These are questions there wasn't even an answer to.
Didn't contemplate.
He wasn't going to quit smoking. Right. He wasn't going to quit drinking. I mean, I have a story that's too long for this podcast right now, but I mean, he literally almost like lost a couple of toes because when he was in the throes of like figuring out the diabetes and all that, a couple of his toes went black from bad circulation and all this. And he saw some doctor in LA and they were like, oh, immediately, you're going to lose the toes and this and that. And, he's like, I need a second opinion. And he flew back to like London and saw a doctor there. And it was like same kind of thing. We need to get these off. It's like an emergency. And, it comes to, he's literally like, he goes to have the surgery done and he's sitting in this office and he's smoking a cigarette, and someone tells him, you're not allowed to smoke in here. What are you, crazy? You can't smoke in this office. And he said, well, if I'm going to fucking lose a toe, I'm going to have a fucking cigarette. And long story short, they said, you can't smoke in here. He said, well, then I won't be in here. And he left. He ends up seeing another doctor, and they literally like told him, you just need to change this or this in your diet, and your feet are going to be fine. And he changed his diet, and he didn't have to have his toes cut off. So a cigarette literally saved him from having, part of his body amputated.
That's interesting. I'm going to use that as a segue because you had mentioned him switching to vodka. And I mean, it's quite topical.
That might have been if I talked to some of my circle of friends, especially the person who actually relayed that tale to me. That might have actually been when he switched to vodka, or no. It wasn't when he switched to vodka. That's when he started using Diet Coke instead of regular Coke in his Jack and Cokes, I believe.
Fair.
The doctor literally told him, switch to Diet Coke and you don't have to lose your toes.
Fair enough. When you mentioned vodka, I've always read that was sort of Vinnie Paul's drink of choice and what allowed him to sort of carry on doing that day to day. We lost him quite recently, and frankly, Pantera was always my favorite band. What was that like to you? Because I've read the media for a number of years, and you've always been exceptionally positive and flying the flag for that band. It
was horrible, shocking, and it's just one of those things you never expect. When I got a text message from the drummer, in my band, Charlie, saying Vinny just died. It's unreal. Just complete disbelief and unreal. What do you want me to say? We were friends since '85 or '86. Spent a lot of time together over the years. Just an awesome guy, just a great guy. Someone who I considered a friend outside of band life. We were friends outside of the fact that we both played in bands, and we both, have been doing this for so long. We were more than just band acquaintances, which I have a million of. But Vinny was one of those few people that I've met over the years because I'm in a band, and a friendship develops that transcends what you're actually doing in your professional life. He's someone I would hang out with outside of, us playing shows together or things like that.
Yeah. Well, I remember in the media, again, probably going back about a decade ago, and I believe it was you who'd made the comments, and it was something along the lines of, look, during the 90s, we never actually made a lot of money touring with Pantera, but we kept going out with them consistently because they were just the biggest party band. What sort of made them different, I guess, compared to a lot of groups around that time?
I don't know, because we didn't really tour with a lot of bands in the 90s. We were either headlining or we did 3 months with them between 97 and 98, and they just made it a lot of fun. The excess on tour was it was pretty mind-blowing. We had never had excess like that in our camp, certainly, even as crazy as maybe as we had ever gotten. It was never at those levels because none of us had a tolerance for the amounts of booze. We were just different people. But when we'd hang out with those guys, I don't know, you just tend to let your hair down a little bit more. And as Darrell would say, you just go with it. And I had a lot of fun doing that with those guys over the years, whether it was when we would just show up, we'd be on tour and playing Dallas, and those guys would come to the show, or they would be playing New York or LA and I'd go see them, or we'd be on tour together, or you always knew what was going to happen on those nights. There was no question, how things were going to end up and how you were going to feel the next day. It was a given that you were going to have an amazing time, and of course I'd be paying for it for 2 days after that, but it was worth it. It was worth every bit of puke and every headache, and everything was always worth it.
And how does with a community where I assume a lot of you guys talk to each other, do you hear about the strife in band before it comes out? So when they were going through their breakup in 2001 or that time, do you guys start to hear about that, or is that still news to you guys at that point in time?
Oh, bands who are friends and travel together, bands know everything about each other, especially when you're on tour with each other, because sometimes hanging out with other bands, you'd rather hang out with other bands than your own band because you're with your own band all the time. So it's fun to be able to have a new dynamic and hang out with other people. And it can be very therapeutic as well, just getting to hang out with other people and realizing that the dysfunction of your own band it's not just you, it's every band. And of course, Pantera was as dysfunctional as every band out there. Basically, every band is a dysfunctional family. I don't know a band that isn't.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that it exists. I should clarify and say any band that's been together longer than 10 years definitely has its dysfunctions. It has to. If it doesn't, then there's really something wrong. Or it's not really a band. It's just, one guy maybe who is the boss and everyone else is just paid, sidemen.
Yeah.
But if you're a band, a proper band, then, the dysfunction is always going to be there because it literally becomes your family. You travel with these people and you're with these people in close quarters more than you're with your family. And, it just can't be helped. It's just the way it is when you've got many many personalities and many attitudes and many egos all together for long periods of time. It's just what's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, everybody knows everything. Everything going on in my band is going on in 100 other bands, and vice versa generally.
And so what do you think, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the business and the scene. I mean, you guys have been around, since the 80s. We're in 2018 now. What do you think about sort of the different decades in metal? Because it's no longer at the height of its popularity. It's hard for new bands to break through. What do you think about the current scene compared to, the 80s where thrash was really coming up?
I have no idea. I don't know. I have a very limited view of anything outside of what I do, because I'm so deep in it on a daily basis. Sometimes it's hard to see outside the bubble that I'm in. I don't really see any difference. I know that things are different. There was no internet in the 80s. I understand things have changed and things are different, but how things work, how a new band, I don't know. It was hard for new bands how did any band make it in the 80s? How did any band make it in the 90s? I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know how we did it other than we just kept playing shows and we just kept trying to write songs. And at some point, people caught up to what we were doing and obviously thought there was money to be made off of the music we were making, because you don't sign a record deal because people like your art. That's not, certainly it didn't work that way in the 80s, maybe in the 60s or the 70s, but I doubt that too.
Yeah.
It's called the record business for a reason, or the music business for a reason. It's not the fucking music charity show. So I really don't know if anything is different or not. I really couldn't tell you, because I'm not a new band, so I wouldn't even know if I was starting out now as a 18-year-old kid trying to get my band signed. I don't know what I would do, because I'm not that. I'm so far removed from anything like that world at this point. So yeah, I don't know. So I don't know that it is different. And even to say that if it's not as popular or this or that, I mean, last time I looked, Metallica and Maiden and AC/DC and Guns N' Roses are like still the biggest bands in the world, and they're all from the 80s. So you know what I mean? So really, what's changed? And we're still out there touring with Slayer and playing to really big crowds all summer here in the States. So, nothing's changed, yet it has. I know that makes no sense, but
fair enough.
In my bubble, in the bubble I live in with Anthrax, it hasn't really changed all that much.
Okay. And so rather than, for yourself then, Scott, are there any, are there milestones that you definitely remember standing out, during your career?
Sure. Yeah. Going from a band, well, I mean, the first one was even just getting to make our first album. To me, in some ways, that's the biggest, because we were working from July 18th, which is already the 18th there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Because July 18th is the day the band formed in 1981, so it's actually our 37th anniversary.
That's fantastic.
And so to go from that first jam session with a bunch of dudes and deciding on that day that we were going to call it Anthrax, to September of '83, so two years and a couple of months of figuring out how the fuck do we get anyone to pay attention to what we're doing so we can make an album. I mean, it was the impossible dream, yet I refused to be denied that, no matter what it took, no matter how hard I had to work, no matter what it cost me at the time. I put my head down like a bull and I charged forward, and I never stopped for 2 years and 3 odd months until we were sitting in Pyramid recording studios in Ithaca, New York, recording our first album for Megaforce Records. I accomplished what I had set out to do. And so the fact that someone actually was putting up money for us to record a record of these songs we wrote when we were, I was 17, 18 years old with a bunch of my friends, and someone that actually thought we should make a record. To me, the fact that happened still sometimes it blows my mind, because we get to go make Fistful of Metal, and then that opens the door for everything that comes after, because we made something that people liked enough to enable us then within a year sign a major label deal to Island Records and make Spreading the Disease and start touring the world, going to Japan for the first time in '86, one of those highlights. And then the massive tour with Metallica at the end of '86, even though when Cliff Burton was killed in the bus accident, another horrible highlight of my career. But leading up to that, the shows in the UK, you got us and Metallica together, a bunch of kids who had already been friends for like 3 years, and here we are selling out, all these 3,500 seat theaters, and people are losing their minds for these new thrash bands from America. It was insane. So we literally were like, well, this is where Iron Maiden was just 7 years ago when they were playing smaller places. Like, we're on our way. Like, we couldn't believe it. And then we played Castle Donington in '87 to 80,000 people, our first big festival, and Among the Living coming out and blowing up all around the world. And then, basically that was it. Then we were able to write our own ticket from that point. We went from playing to 800 kids in clubs to 8,000 people in arenas in 7 months on that record. It's things like that just still blow my mind. Making a record with Public Enemy just because I wanted to, because I wanted to work with Chuck D. So we made that happen. Making Sound of White Noise and reinventing the band in 1993 against all odds, having changed singers. Joey coming back in 2010, and the last 8 years of the band being bigger than like the previous 15. I mean, it's just, the list kind of goes on and on.
And so what would be, out of your releases when you look back on it, what's your favorite Anthrax record?
I can't say I have a favorite record, because it's always going to be the most recent one, because it's the songs that are still the newest to me. So it's really, the question doesn't really work for me, because it's always going to be whatever's the newest, which would be For All Kings at this point. But even better answer would be the next one is my favorite. But it'll always be the most recent record, just because it's the songs that are still freshest in my mind, and that I'm still like. There's still songs of For All Kings we haven't even played live yet. So,
right, okay.
It's still so new.
So if you weren't playing in Anthrax, is there a band that you wish that you were playing in otherwise in a fantasy world?
Oh, AC/DC.
Yeah, that's the one.
I mean, there's many, of course, but I mean, yeah. If somehow I had the choice, yeah. I mean, the idea of ever getting to be on stage with that, and it doesn't have to be on stage. It could be in a rehearsal room, anything. But the idea of getting to stand where Malcolm, would have normally been standing, and get to play the rhythm parts on any AC/DC song would be, for me, and hope that I did it justice, and that Angus wouldn't turn around and look at me and be like, you got to go. I hope that I'd be able to stand there and nobody would look at me mean or cross. That would be to me that I could probably retire after that. There would be nothing left to do.
Cool. I mean, you're coming down to Australia. You've talked about sort of in your early career breaking through Japan. Are there any, insights or anything that's particularly interesting to you about going to different countries? I mean, initially, I assume there would have been a bit of cultural shock, but is there anything that you find, a little bit humorous when you travel around from one country to another these days?
These days? No, I don't know. Not humorous, but I just, I still like going to a lot of places on this planet, as much as I kind of dislike the actual traveling. And certainly I don't like leaving home for long periods of time and being away from my family. That's why they do come out a lot with me these days, which then I don't mind. It's fine. I'll go away. I'll do anything if they're with me. But there's some cities I love to go to because there's probably based on the fact that there's a restaurant I want to go eat in,
Right.
Something like that. So a lot of times, like if we're going on a European tour, I'll look at the routing and always try and make sure we have let's try and have a day off in Paris and let's try and have a day off in Rome. It's not rocket science, let's try and have a day off in Vienna. There's a lot of really beautiful cities that have a lot to offer that I don't normally get to go to, and spend much time in. So even one day to get to go walk around some of these cities and walk around all day and then go have a fabulous meal, that sometimes can make a month away from home, just that one day. Not even talking about how great the shows are on a tour, because my time on stage is precious for me. That's sacred. That's still what makes everything worth happening, because I love playing shows. But sometimes just those days off in a tour to recharge your batteries and kind of clear your head, and then get ready to play another 5-6 shows in a row, and you have it in a great city. It really makes it worthwhile.
Look, probably start to wind down now. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, though, is with with the internet, and especially in America with sort of the polarizing left and right, do you have sort of any opinions on entertainers getting more and more taking opinions on political matters when they're entertainers?
Look, everybody has opinions. I don't understand why, because I see it online. I'll see entertainers, whether they're musicians or actors or whoever, painters, it doesn't matter. I see entertainers make public statements through social media one way or the other. And there's this immediate reaction generally from a lot of the hide behind the computer screen trolls of the internet, who say you should keep your mouth shut and, stick to what you're doing. Go write songs. Don't comment on this. You don't know anything about this. And I just always find that interesting, because it's just opinion. Well, what makes the guy, a guy who paints houses for a living has just as much right to his opinion as the guy playing bass in a big rock band. You know what I mean? Everyone has an opinion. So why if someone in a band has something to say politically, you know what, if you don't like it, well, then no one's forcing you to follow them on social media. And that goes either way, left or right. I'm not saying that, someone who says something pro-Trump or anti-Trump, everyone has their right. And if you don't like it, instead of wasting your time, well, of course, anyone who's, what I should say is, anyone who's sitting there worrying about what some dude in a band is saying about politics and getting upset about it, and then actually taking the time to write about it, really, to my mind, has too much time on their hands. Who the fuck has time to sit around and read political commentary on Twitter? Anyway, that's how I should have answered this thing in the first place. And if that's where you're getting your news, well, then that's also a problem. But I have a million opinions about all kinds of things on this planet, and I don't give a shit what anyone else has to say about it, because they're my opinions. And I give the respect to anybody else on this planet, no matter what they do, no matter where they come from. They have the right to their opinion. That's the country we live in. We're allowed to have opinions. We still are, even with everything going on these days. Amazingly enough, we're still allowed to have opinions. So I always find it kind of discouraging when people try to shut down someone else's opinion and tell them to shut up and to stick to what you know. Because how do you know the person making this comment, how do you know they haven't been studying this for decades, and they might know more about politics than these talking heads on television who supposedly are political commentators? You don't fucking know. So let people speak. Who gives a shit? And the polarization in this country has really become it's really annoying, to put it bluntly. To me, I really don't understand it. I don't really understand why people can't even have a conversation anymore about things. It's just it's almost like there's no conversation to be had. There's either you're right and you're wrong, or no, you're right, I'm right and you're wrong. There's no middle ground anymore. And look, I've been around a long time. I've been of voting age for 36 years now, and I've never seen anything like that. I thought it was bad in the 80s when Reagan was president and people didn't like him and all that. And then, and when George W. Bush was president, and that caused a lot of problems. And when Obama was president and people didn't like him, or the Clintons, and, there's always going to be, not everyone's going to be happy with the person. People talk about John Kennedy with rose-colored glasses, but I fucking watched Ken Burns' Vietnam. That motherfucker is the reason why 50,000 Americans died, because he didn't get us out of the war when he could have, and people look back at him with these rose-colored glasses of, oh, John F. Kennedy, when America was still had its innocence. It's like, no, when America never had innocence. That's what I see these. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but
that's fine.
Trump's, the whole make America great again. And my question has been, ever since I've seen that, I in theory, I wish I would love that. I love the idea in theory, but my question is, when was that? What, make America great again? Well, when are they talking about? When do they want it to be like? Like when women couldn't vote, or blacks didn't have the same rights as white people, or I could go on and on with a list. I'm trying to figure out when they're talking about. When is this time? And look, don't get me wrong, I love my country. I love America and all the opportunities I've been afforded because I was lucky enough to be born as an American. I love it here. But you know what? I'm also a student of history. It's something I've been a student of since even, since I was a little kid, learning history in school, and then of my own volition going out and reading books. And in my short lifetime on this planet, I've lived through a lot of crazy shit on this planet. And, America, we're a young country. I tend to think a lot of people like to think we're the leaders of the world and all this crap. But you know what? We're like a 9-year-old child compared to the rest of the world. We haven't been around that long. And we're a very, very young country. And so going back to that slogan, "Make America Great Again," I just feel like that's a question that nobody can answer. If I was to pose that question to somebody, well, when was that? What do you like? When we first got our independence from the British, like when we first. But even then, we were all owning. Like everyone was slave owners at that point. So yeah, we gained our independence. And everything that came with that, yet that was cool for white people. You know what I mean?
I do.
There's pretty much any time in the history of this country since 1776, it would be very easy to throw a wrench into the idea of when America was great, because there's always been a dark side. There's always been that. And look, I understand people have an idea of how they would love this country to be, but you got to remember what was really going on when people look back and go, oh, things were so great back in the post-World War II 1950s. And then be very easy to come up with a list of all the fucking things that were not good at that same time. Don't get me started on civil rights. So anyway, I'm a student of history. I really am. And so that's why I feel like if I have an opinion on something, it's based in fact. It's not fake news. History is history. Things have happened that are real. They happened. You can't deny them. And anyway, So it's frustrating. It's frustrating that facts don't seem to matter so much anymore, and that to me is really fucking scary.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I've asked you a lot of questions before we wrap up today. Is there anything else that you might like to address, or tell people about your tour that's coming up?
I've got a lot of stories, and so I touched on some things earlier. Certainly, we talked a little bit about Lemmy, and you brought up Pantera, and I've got some epic tales that really, there's an old cliche: you can't write this stuff, and it's true. Some of the tales they're just so ridiculous and just so completely over the top. And if I didn't have the photos from some of them, I wouldn't. It'd be hard for me to even remember if they were actually true, or if I was like making these up and like embellishing tales that really weren't as crazy. But they're actually in reality, most of them are crazier than I can even really get across to people having lived them. But I've got, look, it sounds weird to talk about myself or sell myself, but I think I'm really good at getting on stage and telling these stories because I've done it enough times to know people enjoy it. I get up in front of people and they laugh in all the right places. So that's a fact. I have the proof and the truth of the matter that these tales that I tell work in a live environment. And I think people, whether or not you know anything about me or my band, because that's not, you don't need to know, you don't need to be an Anthrax fan to come out and enjoy this show, because most of the tales are just very human stories of hilarity, really. And with most of the time me at the center of them being a complete idiot. So I highly recommend it. I can't recommend it high enough. I guarantee you will have fun.
Excellent. Scott, it's been great to chat with you, and I guess all we can say now is I look forward to seeing you when you're down under.
Right on, man. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.